Yeah, so we have gone through the first 10 chapters of Daniel, and now we come to the last prophetic section of the book of Daniel, which is the end of the book anyway. So, we have seen that chapter 2 is the first prophecy. Chapter 7 is the next prophecy. Chapter 8 is the third prophecy. And then the fourth one covers from about chapter 10 to chapter 12. But really, the explanation begins in chapter 11. Chapter 10 is like the preamble. So, what we have seen, or what we have concluded, is that these four prophecies are basically, are kind of a repetition, and yet not exactly, but they more or less cover the same periods of time. All of them take us down to the end of the world. The image begins with Babylon and goes through all the kingdoms. The four beasts in Daniel 7 begins with Babylon again, the lion, and it goes right down to the judgment and the end of the world. In chapter 8, it doesn't begin with Babylon. Instead, it begins with the second kingdom, Medo-Persia. It goes through Medo-Persia, Greece, and it goes down to the end of the world. And we said that the reason why it doesn't begin with Babylon is because by the time Daniel got this vision, Babylon was no longer relevant. Babylon was passing away. Not quite gone, but it was about to be overthrown. So Babylon was no longer figuring in the record of the nation. So God doesn't start with Babylon, he starts with Medo-Persia. Now in Daniel chapter 11, it's the same thing. Babylon is gone by the time Daniel gets this vision. And so Babylon is not mentioned. God starts with Medo-Persia and Greece, and he goes through all the history of the world right down till the end, till the coming of Jesus. So all the prophecies cover the same basic period of time. But one other thing I want to point out that we already looked at, but I want to reinforce, is that it's not just that these four prophecies are going over the same thing, but with more detail. That's what you often hear. Each prophecy covers the same ground as the one before it, but they just give you more detail. But there's more to it than that. And what we try to point out is that the book of Daniel, this is the key to understanding the book of Daniel and understanding the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation. And I think it is the key to understanding all the prophecies of the Bible. It is to understand that everything has to do with the kingdom. Everything has to do with the conflict that is taking place in the universe is a conflict between two great kingdoms. And why kingdoms? Because it has to do with the governing principle behind these two kingdoms. One of them is the kingdom of God, the other one is the kingdom of Satan. And if somebody were to say, how can it be that the kingdom of Satan has an equal billing as the kingdom of God? How can that be? Then the answer is, it's because it's not talking about who has greater power, or who is the creator, or who is the originator. Nobody stands on an equality with God in those things. What God has chosen when it comes to the kingdom government, God has chosen to give Satan equal billing. And the only reason, the logical reason, the reason that makes perfect sense for those people who don't understand, the thing that makes perfect sense is that there is a rival government that is trying to be established. Somebody is trying to establish a government to rival God's government. And if this is the case, and he's being allowed to do it, and it is clear that it is happening. Anybody who doesn't believe in that, you don't have any way to explain why evil is still exists, why Satan is still alive, why problems still continue, and yet God is the good God. The only answer is because the rival government is being given equal opportunity. It makes perfect sense when you think of it that way, and it's the only thing that makes sense. The rival government is being given equal opportunity because God has to demonstrate. The point is, God is to demonstrate whose government is better. You and I know, there's no question, God's government is better. But if the entire universe had known this from the beginning, Satan would not have gotten a chance. He presented his case in such a way that there were some who believed that he had a point. And I think that it all comes down to this elementary question. I think that the issue is this: what Satan presented to the universe was the question of liberty and slavery. Satan presents the idea that to be under the dominion of somebody else, where somebody takes over your body and lives inside of you and directs the way you behave and even the way you think, even the direction of your will. Satan presents an idea that on the surface seems to be true. He says that this is a kind of bondage, it's a kind of slavery. I'm sure everybody can understand the reasoning behind that and why, if you don't know God, it might sound like a reasonable idea, right? If I determine I'm going to take over Sister Teresa's mind and I'm going to decide what she's going to do every moment of the day, and I want to have that kind of control over her, in this world, it would be absolute bondage. And we would call it brainwashing, we would call it enslavement, and we'd call it other things. And we would be right. Because I don't have the wisdom nor the goodwill to do this. Now God, being a person who is completely good and who is completely wise and who means us only good, it gives him the liberty to offer us this kind of life. Satan claims it is slavery. And Satan offers something else, and what he offers is a world in which God does not decide what we should do or how we should behave. We make the decisions. We determine what is good and what is evil. We see what is good and what is bad, and we determine what is best for us. He makes the claim that this is true freedom. And you can see again why this will appeal to many persons, and why, if it was presented in the right way at the beginning, even angels could have been deceived. If at the beginning nobody knew where this was going, and somebody presented this idea, it kind of makes logical sense, especially if you don't know that without God, the only thing that remains is evil. I think that was something that even Satan didn't understand at the beginning. We understand it today. I mean, some of us, right? A lot of Christians still don't understand this, but we understand this. But, you know, we have come to understand that the whole basis of goodness is God. Jesus is teaching that there's none good but one, that is God, that is embedded in us. But I want to suggest to you that at the beginning, this principle was not known. So when Satan came along and he said that, he was offering a way of existence that created more freedom, allowed more liberty. If you thought that in you it was possible to be good, it made sense. It made sense. If we have the ability to be good in ourselves, like so many people still believe, then it makes sense to ask the question, why then shouldn't we be allowed to choose our own direction? You look at the world today and you see the things that people say, all right? You see the world moving more and more in a direction where self-government and self-morality is the prevailing sentiment. I mean, many years ago they called it situation ethics, which means that humans get to decide what is right and wrong depending on the situation. Then you see that today, I mean, one of the most brazen areas in which people defy God is that people set out to choose their own gender, is that men get married to men, women get married to women, and the powers that be, the governing powers of this planet, make it a crime to even disagree with something like this. In other words, the principle of man deciding what is right and wrong, and not God. Man becoming his own God. This principle that Satan initiated from the beginning has come to predominate the thinking of human beings. And I would like to say that it is evident that the more developed human societies, the more you see this coming out. Like in the more primitive countries, the more backward countries, the third world countries, you find that this kind of thinking is very far from the ways of the people. There might be a lot of wickedness in many of these countries, but they still have some kind of idea that there is a God who determines what is right and what is wrong. In the developed countries of Europe, North America, and what is called the first world countries, this no longer is a factor. The factor is, what do people believe? What does my education, does my psychology, what does my psychiatric training teach me is really good and what is bad? And you can see it bleeding over into every aspect of human endeavor. They tell you that you should not punish children. In everything, they turn away from the principles of the Bible. They tell you that there's no difference between male and female. There's no distinction of roles. Women are capable of doing everything that men can do, and maybe vice versa. And the whole pattern of nature and the pattern of God's ideas is rejected completely. The science of modern psychology has come to conclusions that sometimes you think it is absolute madness, and you don't understand how people can think so crazily. But the point is, it began from the very beginning. It was Lucifer's philosophy that has become embedded in the psyche of human beings, and it is just finding maturity in our day. So anyway, I got a little bit off track, because what I really wanted to say is that this is the whole point of the entire Bible, the two kingdoms. And the kingdom of God has been morphing, going through a process of development, heading towards a certain point. From the beginning, or from the days of Israel, God set up a kingdom. And this kingdom was a model. Mark my words, it was a model. It was not really the kingdom of God. Israel was not the kingdom of God. It was a model of the kingdom. And most of you will understand what I mean. God established teaching tools, patterns, symbols. So, like you have a toy car that you give to a child, and it represents one day when he will own a real vehicle. A doll for a little girl represents one day when she might have her own child. Israel was made a model of the kingdom. God called a group of people and set them up in a particular place on the earth and gave them certain rules and restrictions. They were a model of the kingdom. You could look at that model and learn some things about the kingdom that was coming. So, the real purpose of God was to establish his kingdom on earth, where he would display the principles of his government. That was the real point. The principles of God's government are to be displayed in his kingdom, so everybody in the universe can look and see the difference between the government that Satan promised and the government, the principles of God's government. This is what is going on. And this confrontation finally comes to its climax in the final days of this world's history, when Satan's principles become elevated and streamlined in the beast and the mark of the beast. And God's kingdom is perfectly exemplified in the 144,000, in that final remnant of God's people. So this is what is going on. So when we understand this, the entire Bible, you can understand the basic principle of the entire Bible. If you don't come to the Bible with this big picture, you find yourself getting into little corners, little pockets, and you get locked into those pockets and you don't know where does this go. To understand the big picture is the key. So, I keep saying so. I keep going to the next point that I think is important. So in the book of Daniel, it is about the kingdom, but here's the point. God uses remember, Israel is a pattern or a symbol of the real kingdom. Okay, so what happens to Israel, the model, is a teaching tool about what is to happen to the real thing. You understand what I'm saying? So when Israel was taken captive, God used this. When Daniel and his friends and the Israelites were in captivity in Babylon, God used this to represent a greater captivity his people would be in. God's people in the real kingdom would be captive in a spiritual Babylon. The church of God would get trapped in a spiritual Babylonian captivity where the principles of God's government would become confused and distorted. What God showed us through Daniel is that there are four things that are related to a kingdom, and that these four things were lost. And in the true kingdom, they were also missing, and they are going to be restored. So the first thing was the actual physical kingdom. Every kingdom has a physical space, has a land space, right? Jamaica has a little island. So many square miles, so long in width, so long in length. I think 50, 40 something miles wide, very small, 150 something miles in length. That's the land space. Israel, the Jews lost their land space. It was taken by the Babylonians, and they were taken out of their land and they were brought to a foreign land. Daniel 2 tells us about the restoration of the land itself. That's why in Daniel 2 we have a symbol of the kingdoms of the world, and they are shown as elements from the earth: gold, silver, brass, iron and clay. This first prophecy focuses on elements, physical elements from the ground, because God is talking about the restoration of the land space, and he even represents the kingdom of Christ as a great stone that is cut out of a mountain. So the first thing that is restored is the first thing that is highlighted is the restoration of the entire kingdom, but an emphasis on the land itself, the physical space of the kingdom. So planet Earth, which is the dominion of God's kingdom, is to be restored to the kingdom of Christ. Then in chapter 7, the second aspect of the kingdom is the government of the kingdom, or the monarchy, the kingship, the rulership, or the political side of the government, if you want to put it that way, because every kingdom also has a ruler, has a ruling authority, a ruling hierarchy. In every kingdom, you have a governing entity, and it shows you, I mean, in Daniel's case, the king of Judah had been taken away. Nebuchadnezzar dug out his eyes and carried him away to Babylon as a captive. The Jews no longer had a king. God shows us in Daniel 7 that the king of Israel is to be restored. In the true kingdom, the Son of Man is given a kingdom that is to last forever and ever. Now, in this picture, the kingdoms of earth are represented like wild animals. Remember the first one, it was talking about the political, about the physical geographic structure. It was represented by elements from the ground. This one is talking about the politics, the political structures of the kingdoms. And what does God represent them as? Wild beasts. A good description of the political powers of this world, right? All those that people admire and they like to praise and to take sides, God sees them as wild animals. Lion, bear, leopard, terrible beast. He's showing us, I think he's giving us an insight into the politics, the nature of the politics of this world, and the nature of the governments of this world. So don't be surprised by any kind of wickedness that they do, because that's their natural nature. It's interesting that while they're all presented as wild beasts, it's in contrast to the kingdom of God, because when it comes to the kingdom of God, there is one seen like the Son of Man. God does not present this one as an animal. Everybody else is a wild beast. This one is like the Son of Man. So the emphasis in Daniel 7 is on the politics of the kingdom, or the government of the kingdom. In Daniel chapter 8, so we looked at the physical kingdom, the physical geography, then the political aspect of the kingdom. In Daniel chapter 8, we are looking at the religious aspect of the kingdom, especially in that day. Every kingdom had its religious side. And of course, Israel, the worship of the sanctuary and the priesthood and all the rituals and ceremonies was an integral part of the entire nation of Israel. And all of this was gone. Nebuchadnezzar flattened the sanctuary, took away all the gold and the vessels from the temple, carried them away to Babylon. And the entire structure of the sacrificial system and the priesthood was scattered. Now God shows us in Daniel 8 the restoring of the true system of worship. And of course, you know that in all of this, Daniel is looking and Daniel is thinking that it's the Jewish kingdom that is going to be restored. Because Daniel is understanding things as a Jew who is looking for the restoration of the kingdom, just like they were looking in the time of Jesus. But God is talking about something far greater that Daniel did not fully understand. So in Daniel 8, when he's talking about the restoration of worship, God shows us these kingdoms now as domesticated animals. A ram, a male sheep, and a he-goat. But it's not just domesticated animals. What is interesting about these two animals is that they are animals that are used in the sanctuary service. We know that rams and goats were used as sacrificial animals. So again, the symbol is very clear that God is talking about. He's talking about the restoration of the kingdom, and it's the worship, the religion of the kingdom that is emphasized here. So what we see in this chapter is that there is a little horn, or there's a great horn that makes war against the worship of the kingdom. It cast down the truth to the ground. It practiced and it prospered, and it cast down the sanctuary, and it made an attack against the prince, and it took away the place of his sanctuary. And God tells us that it would be 2,300 days, then the sanctuary would be restored. So we see clearly that there's to be a restoration of true worship, according to Daniel chapter 8. Now we come to Daniel chapter 11, and what are we focusing on? We had the restoration of the geographic kingdom, the physical kingdom. We have the restoration of the monarchy or the government. We have the restoration of the religion. And now, what else is missing from the kingdom? It's the people, the citizens. You can't have a kingdom without the people, the citizens. You might have a worship, the king, and the land space, but who makes up the kingdom? You have to have the people. And so the final prophecy shows us the restoring of the kingdom. Now this prophecy is very interesting, and it's a little different. And I'll tell you how. Daniel 2, you have a symbol of an image. Daniel 7, you have a symbol of 4 animals. That's you keep. Daniel 8, you have a symbol of the ram and the he-goat. Daniel 11, there are no symbols. There are no symbols. The prophecy of Daniel 11 shows you real people, real events, real the things that are happening. There are no symbols used at all. And that is interesting. So it's going to affect the way we look at Daniel 11. And I'll comment on that more as we go through the chapter. But go ahead, Brother Kip.
Hey, Brother David, do you have those four things like wrote down in a chart or shown on a chart? I know you have the all the other things, but just those wrote down. I
Um,
didn't know if you was using your.
let me see if I can bring it up very quickly, brother Keep. Um, I have it here somewhere, but I just have to look quickly to bring up my that particular chart. Since you, I should have I should have thought that. To be honest, I wasn't planning to go through, and I have to wait. I have a little problem here, which is that my my hard drive crashed on me, and I lost all my charts. But thankfully, I had them backed up to a place I have on the internet, and so they are safe. But right now, I'm trying to open it, and they're not opening because they have to be downloaded. So I have to wait on them to download before I can show it. So by the end of the session, they should have finished downloading. So I'll show you before the day is up, Brother Keith. All right, so what we're going to do this evening is to, or for the remainder of the time, we're going to just start going through Daniel chapter 11. Now I'm going to tell you, frankly, I said it the last time we went through Daniel 11. I'm going to say it again. Daniel 11 is my least favorite part of the prophecies. It's my least favorite. I mean, I don't necessarily hate history, but the details in this history, it's so convoluted and it's so unclear. You have to go through and do a double take at every step to figure out who is it talking about here. And by the time you finish figuring out who it is talking about, most people don't have a clue who those people are. This is ancient history from 2,000 plus years ago. So nobody cares about that history anymore. If you're a historian, I have an idea it will be very fascinating. But for most of us, it's just a series of events that really kind of look irrelevant. I know that that is how it appears to me. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to read through, and all I'm going to say is, this section here is speaking about the Greek kingdom. This section here is speaking about the Medo-Persian kingdom. This section here is speaking about the Roman kingdom, and then we might look at some of the events. If there's anybody who is interested in the details of what all of this means, I know Brother Johan, he did a study on it, and his little study, I could share it with you, or he would share it with you. He went into all the details about those kings and every one of them. And if you don't have that, if you go to the book Daniel and the Revelation by Uriah Smith, he gives a detailed explanation as well. And if you really want, I could find a document that gives all the explanation and share with who wants it. But for myself, at the moment, I don't really see that it makes a great deal of difference if we are able to identify every one of these individuals in the chapter. So we're going to look at it, and then if you have any questions, fine. We can actually identify these powers if need be. But if you have any questions, please let me know, and we'll look at it, all right? So let me go ahead and share my Bible. And unfortunately, it's starting to rain, and I really hate when it rains when I'm having a study, because then I have to talk loud. All right. I feel like I have to talk loud when it's raining. All right, so Daniel 11. It says, also in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. Now, who is speaking here? Well, in the last chapter, we saw that this was the angel Gabriel. Angel Gabriel. See, he said at the end of the last chapter, chapter 8, I will show thee that which is noted in the scripture of truth. And there is none that holdeth with me in these things but Michael your prince. So this is Gabriel speaking to Daniel. And what he says that, all right, Brother Matt says, I'm having an echo and there's some degree of static. Now, I think the static may be the rain, but I think the echo is because I turned up my microphone this morning. And I'm always afraid of doing that because then it starts to echo and it
It sounds
starts
quite
to.
fine
You're
to me,
fine
brother.
on my end, Brother David.
You're
I
just
don't hear
fine.
an echo, Brother David.
Okay, what were you saying, Aaron?
I say you sound just fine. Nothing's wrong.
Okay, all right. Well, okay, that's reassuring then. So, Brother Matt, maybe you need to check your settings then because everybody else seems to be okay. All right. All right, Brother Wayland says he hears it as well. I'm going to turn on my audio just a little bit, all right, just a little bit, because I understand that if your audio device, if your speaker is a little different, you might hear it a little bit more than somebody else. So let me just turn down my device a little bit, not too much, just a little, and maybe it might help. All right, so let me hope that will help those who are having a problem. All right, so the person speaking is the angel Gabriel. He's Daniel's guide, and he's there to take him through this vision. Now, anyway, God knows why he gave this vision, but I can guarantee that as we are reading through it, you will have a challenge figuring out who is who. But if you're a historian and you understand the history of the nations of Greece and Medo-Persia and Rome, you'll be able to pick up, and it might be very fascinating for you. But I'm going through it because I don't know that any of us is really that fascinated with ancient history. The angel says, and now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. So, the last king of Persia, at the time when Daniel was getting this vision, I mean, you had several kings in Persia. You had Artaxerxes, you had Cyrus, who was one of the earlier kings. So anyway, the angel tells Daniel there were yet to be 3 other kings in Persia. And then in the time of the 4th one, who was going to be the richest of all, he was going to stir up people, stir up his kingdom against Greece. It says, and a mighty king shall stand up that shall rule it dominion and do according to his will. This is the first Greek king, or the first dominant Greek king, and you know his name. He was called Alexander. His name was Alexander of Macedon, and he was such an outstanding warrior that in history has labeled him Alexander the Great. So God identifies him very clearly here as a mighty king that will have great dominion and do according to his will. And if you will remember the previous prophecy, he was represented as a goat with a notable horn in his forehead. Verse 4 says, and when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided toward the 4 winds of heaven. So Alexander's kingdom was divided among his 4 generals. And let me see. Yeah, this was the Greek kingdom. I'm just going to put the names on the screen. Because Alexander the Great and his kingdom was divided among the 4 generals, Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. But it says the kingdom would not be to his posterity. It wasn't one of Alexander's children who inherited the kingdom because he didn't have any. Nor according to his dominion which he ruled. It wasn't as great as his kingdom because it was divided into 4, and none of them became as great as his kingdom. For his kingdom shall be plucked up even for others. beside those, not for its posterity, so it was for others. And the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes. I'm kind of vaguely trying to follow. The king of the south was Ptolemy, and Ptolemy settled in Egypt in the south. The king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, his son, both of them ruled down in Egypt, the southern part of the kingdom. And he shall be strong above him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. Now, it's kind of so vague, you can't quite follow what is going on. He shall be strong above him and have dominion. Strong above who? It doesn't really say, and that's one of the things about Daniel 11. It makes innuendos and hints without coming out straight and telling you. The king of the south will be strong, and one of his princes, and he who? King of the south? He shall be strong above him. Above him who? I think the suggestion is that it means one, it shall be strong above the king of the north. So if you look at the chart, the king of the south and one of his princes, that's the second one, will be stronger than the kings of the north. You see an arrow pointing over there where it says Seleucus Callinicus.
Brother David, I see it differently.
Say again?
Based on how it is read, it would appear differently to me. It seemed to be saying that the king of the south is strong, and one of his princes is strong also, but he is stronger than either the king of the south, the prince, one of the princes is stronger than the king, or the king is stronger than the prince.
It may be, but I'm going to tell you, as we continue reading through the chapter, you'll see that it is not safe to conclude just by how it looks. You're going to see that, because as we go through, you're going to see places where, based on how it is written, it should mean a certain thing, and it doesn't. So, that's one of the challenges with Daniel 11 especially. It exists in different parts of the Bible in some of these prophecies, but especially in Daniel 11. It talks about he, him, he comes against him, and you don't know who is it that comes against who. It's as we go back and actually look at history, we kind of figure out some of what it means. Anyway, that's my response to that point at the moment. All right? It says in verse 6, and in the end of years they shall join themselves together. They who? Well, does it mean that the king of the south will join with the king of the north? It seems so. It says, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand nor his arm, neither shall who stand, and whose arm. You see what I'm saying? The references are very vague. The king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she, that is the king's daughter of the south, shall not retain the power of the arm. In other words, the influence that she was supposed to gain by coming to marry the king of the north is not going to be retained. Neither shall he stand nor his arm. This he is who? The king of the south or the king of the north? It's not very clear. But anyway, I'll tell you what the historians say. They say it was the daughter of the king of the north, and I won't even try to put the name on it. It was one of these Ptolemies. Her name was Berenice, and she came over to be married to the king of the north, so the kingdoms would be united. But when she came, she was ultimately murdered along with her little son. The king, I think the king took somebody else for his wife. They didn't want this woman to gain influence in the kingdom. They actually murdered her and his son, and her son, and the people who came with her. She shall be given up, and they that brought her. And he that begot her, they say it should be he that was begotten by her. And he that strengthened her in these times. I think what they say is that the king that she was married to, who was standing by her, he also was assassinated. That last point about the king, I don't remember perfectly. But what I'm saying is that as you look at this, you can see why it is a little difficult to figure out exactly who is being spoken about, because the references are very vague. It says, but out of a branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate. It says that this is her brother. He stood up, that was in the southern king, which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and shall deal against them, and shall prevail. So he comes to attack the king of the north in revenge for what they did to his sister. And shall also carry captives into Egypt, their gods with their princes and with their precious vessels of silver and of gold. And he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So the king of the south shall come into his own kingdom, and shall return into his own land. But his sons shall be stirred up. Whose sons? And shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. The suggestion here, when it says, somebody unmuted? Yeah, somebody was unmuted. When it says, his son shall be stirred up, you would logically conclude that it is the king of the south, because he's a subject. The king of the south shall come into his kingdom and shall return to his own land. But his son shall be stirred up. It means the king of the south? No. But history says it's talking about the king of the north. Remember, the king of the south came up into the north and carried away captives into Egypt. And he continued more years than the king of the north. He attacked the northern king because of what they did to his sister. Then he returns to his kingdom and returns to his own land. But his sons shall be stirred up. History says this is talking about the king of the north. So if you look at this here, and you will see why I'm saying you have to be careful. So you would logically think, based on the structure of the English, that it's talking about the king of the south. The sons of the king of the south will be stirred up, assemble a multitude of forces, and overflow and pass through. He shall be stirred up even to his fortress. But actually it's talking about the king of the north. He comes back to make revenge against the king of the south. But it's the sons.
Yeah, that makes sense, Brother David, because it says that the king of the south continued more years than the king of the north. That means the king of the north died.
Right. So, but then the previous statement says, so the king of the south shall come into his kingdom and shall return to his own land. So the logical English conclusion is that his sons refers to the king of the south, because he's the immediate subject.
Yeah.
But what the Bible does, it jumps past verse 9 and goes back to verse 8. And you have to watch out for these things, because it happens a lot in the prophecies, and especially in chapter 8 here. So the sons of the king of the north come, and then they attack the king of the south, and it goes on to now, and the king of the south shall be moved with color. King of the south gets angry and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north, and he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. This is what I find so difficult about this chapter, is because it just tells you over and over, the king of the north comes against him, the king of the south comes back against him, the king of the north comes against him, the king of the south comes back against him. If you have the time, you can go through and find out who all these people are. But as I'm saying, it was just back and forth. I don't really see that we need to go into the details of the history. Now, the king of the south comes against the king of the north, and when he had taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by it. That's the king of the south. For the king of the north shall return, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches. Now, as I said, if you're a historian, you can go and you can find out exactly the names of these kings, because the history is there. And I think one of the reasons why God does this is because he wants people to be able to go and see that the prophecy is accurate. You can go and look at these prophecies, identify these kings, and you can see that everything that is said here, a greater multitude, the king exalted, and all of this, you can see it fits perfectly with the record of history. Now in verse 14, it says, and in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. Now, I just go by what the historians say. They say the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision. They say that this is referring to the Roman armies. They say that at this point, Rome intervened. In some battle that was taking place, Rome intervened to defend the Jews at some point. So you can take out this sentence, and the verse would read, but in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south, but they shall fall. So those who stand up to defend the king of the south will fall. And during that period, the Romans took a position where they actually defended the Jews at one point. That's what they say this verse means. But those who are defending the king of the south will fall, because the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, the people who are defending him, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. But he that cometh against him, that is the king of the north will come against the king of the south, shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him. He shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed. So, I mean, it's clear that we are now identifying the nation of Rome. And by this time,
Brother David, I don't
yes.
understand that verse that talk about the robbers of thy people. Could you go back up there?
All right, I'm going to read it the way I've read that it has been interpreted, because like I said, this is one area that I don't have much expertise in. It says, in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south, but they shall fall. Those who stand up against the king of the south, right?
But that phrase about also the robbers of thy people. So is this that if the Romans are helping the Jews, how are they called the robbers of thy people? It sounds to me that these are people who are robbing from the Jews.
Look at what it says in the alternate translation on the right. There's some translation problems sometimes. The violent ones among your people will also lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision. Maybe that is what I think this term, the robbers of thy people, is a questionable interpretation.
Okay. It does look questionable to me. All right.
Anyway, the king of the north will come and cast up a mount. I think by this time now, the north is being taken over by the Romans. The Romans have become the king of the north. So remember, when he talks about the king of the north and the king of the south, it's not the same nation that we are talking about. Remember, Medo-Persia morphed into Greece, and now Greece, the northern part of Greece, is being taken over by the Romans. But you still have a conflict between the people who live in the north and the people who live in the south, Egypt and so on. So God just continues talking about the king of the north and the king of the south without identifying that we have actually moved on to a different political power. So it's clear that the king of the north by this time has become Rome, because it says in verse 16, he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed. That's a good description of Rome. Rome was the power that destroyed the nation of the Jews, destroyed Judah. So it's clear now that at this point we are looking at Rome. So what we see following after now is going to be a history of the Roman Empire. It says, he shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Again, it says, thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her, but she shall not stand on his side, neither be for him. Now, I understand that this has to do with two divisions of the Roman Empire. On the one hand, you had Julius Caesar, and on the other hand, you had a Roman general by the name of Antony, and Antony was governing down in Egypt, while Julius Caesar was the ruler of the entire Roman Empire. But Antony began to offend the Roman people because he fell in love with an Egyptian princess by the name of Cleopatra. You might have heard the story of Antony and Cleopatra. He fell in love with an Egyptian princess named Cleopatra, and he began to be more and more tied up in Egypt, so that he would even celebrate his military victories down in Egypt when it should have been, all of this should have been done in Rome. So the Romans, the powers in Rome began to realize that he seemed to be setting up a rival kingdom down in Egypt. And so a war broke out between Julius Caesar and Antony. So the king of the north now would be Caesar and Rome, and Antony would be the southern part of the Roman Empire. And when he says he shall give
Brother
him the
David,
daughter. Yes, Brother Kim.
Sister Talia's had her hand up for a while.
Oh, okay. Sister Talia, you may go ahead.
Uh, Hello, Brother David and brethren.
Hi, Sister Talia.
My stuff is a little bit deep in terms of questioning you, and so I'll let you go, Brother Kip, and maybe I can hold it off till the end because Bible versions are very important for context, as you said earlier, as well as understanding geographics for that time and the wars that broke out and how it applied to either Rome and the papacy and other two kingdoms who were not involved in certain things, as far as what I know from doing the study historically. But so I'll leave it alone. And thank you.
Okay, Sister Talia. All right. Now, verses 18 and 19 refers to the death of Julius Caesar. It says, after this shall he turn his face unto the isles and shall take many, but a prince of his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Now this refers, you know that Julius Caesar was murdered by a group of Roman officials. One of them was his best friend, a man by the name of Brutus. So when it says a prince of his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease, and then he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. And these verses are giving you a kind of preview of things that happened in the Roman Empire. We're going to come back to this a little later on in the chapter. Verse 20 talks about the man that we know as Tiberius Caesar. Augustus Caesar. It says, then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom. Augustus Caesar, I believe he was the nephew of Julius Caesar. And he was
Brother David,
identified.
I don't mean to interject, but it was Tiberius Caesar. You can find that in Luke, you can find he was the raiser of taxes at that time, wasn't it? And not Augustus?
I think you will find that I am right, Sister Talia. Let's
Okay.
look. Let's look and see who it was that
You say he was a nephew of who?
Julius Caesar. See, it says in Luke 2, Sister Talia, it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. So actually
Correct. Thank you.
it was
Sorry
Caesar,
about that.
yeah, it was Caesar Augustus who was the raiser of taxes. But within few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. Now verse 21 does talk about Tiberius Caesar. After Caesar Augustus died, in his estate shall stand up a vile person to to whom they shall not give the honor of his kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Tiberius Caesar was the one who took over from Caesar Augustus, and it was actually during his reign that Jesus was crucified. It says in verse 22, and with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant. So Jesus was killed in this time of Tiberius Caesar. Now it goes on to talk about the work of the Roman Empire. We are done with Greece. We are done with Medo-Persia. It says after the league made with him, he made some kind of agreement with the Jews. After the league made with him, we have a starting point there that we can go back to history and find that there was a certain point where there was an agreement between the Romans and the Jews. After the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. This is the history of Rome. He shall enter peaceably even upon the fattest places of the province, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey, spoil riches, yea, and shall forecast his devices against a stronghold, even for a time. And he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army. But he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. Again, according to the historians, this goes back to the same battle between Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Yea, they that feed of the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. More details being given of this battle. And both these kings, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the appointed time. All right, and it says, and then shall he return into his land with great riches. This is Julius Caesar, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. And that takes us through the history, all of that history, which, as I'm saying, is not my favorite section of the prophecies at all. Sister Talia, your hand is up again.
It was because I wasn't quite.
Not hearing you.
I'm sorry. I was saying that I wasn't quite sure of who the king of the south was to the king of the north in application with Rome falling and the papal system coming, and Egypt being the king of the south, and I guess this would be chapter 11 because I don't know what chapter you were on.
We're at chapter 11.
Chapter 11. So the king of the north, in my opinion, let me say it that way, couldn't possibly be the papal system, because of the fact that they never went to war with anyone.
Sure, but did somebody say it was a papal system?
Oh no, I'm sorry. Then I didn't hear that. I was just saying from what I understand now, for it to be.
Sure.
So you were speaking of Rome, but then it turns to the papal system, right?
Right. I didn't say that. We didn't come to that part yet.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry then. Okay, because I just.
Aha. I
Yeah,
see.
that explains it.
Yeah,
Ding, ding,
that
ding, ding,
explains
ding,
it.
ding.
Yeah.
Um, what is that? Brother David,
Mhm.
did did the Bible jump back to before Augustus Caesar?
This is what the historians say. I don't have any other way to interpret it, so I just accept that.
Yeah, 'cause it seemed like we were talking about Julius Caesar, and then it went on to Augustus Caesar and Tiberius, and then all of a sudden go back to Augustus, back to Julius
Mark
Caesar.
Antony, right? So what they say is that first of all there's an overview, then it goes back and gives more details.
Oh, okay, all right. I just wanted to get that clear because thought I was missing something there.
All right. Now this is at verse 29. is where they say we come to the papacy, and I tend to believe this. I tend to believe this because of what it says, of what follows. It says, at the time appointed, verse 29, at the time appointed, he shall return and come toward the south. Now, who returns and comes towards the south? It's the king of the north. But the telling sentence here is, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. The Bible gives us a clue here that something has changed. It doesn't tell you definitely exactly what it is, but it says that when the king of the north returns and comes toward the south, there's going to be a change. It won't be like former days. Something has happened. And what happens from this point onwards, going down to the end of the chapter, suggests that there's a change in nature of the king of the north. Now, from this point, it stops focusing on the battle between both kings, and it tells you something about the nature of the king of the north. That's why I believe it now morphs into the nature of this king, and we can see elements of the papacy there. Although I have some comments to make on that. It says, for the ships of Chittim shall come against him. Now, I confess, there's nobody who can explain exactly what this means. The ships of Chittim, there's a little island called Greece, near Greece, called Kittim. And the idea is that this is talking about the ships of Kittim. But how did they come against him, this king of the north? I've not read any commentaries which give us a rational idea of what it means that the ships of Kittim, who they are, and what it means that they come against the king of the north. I see Sister Talia, but hold on a bit. It says, because of this, therefore he, the king of the north, shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. So what we see happening here is it is believed that this now becomes a religious association. Rome is morphing into a religio-political power, with the papacy being a major player. And there is now an attack against the Holy Covenant, meaning we are at a place where it says in Daniel chapter 8 that it would cast down the truth to the ground. It would practice and it would prosper. He will have intelligence with those that forsake the Holy Covenant. He would find that a lot of apostates in the church would make friendship with this apostate power. And you can see where it says in verse 31, an arm shall stand on his part, meaning that political power would be given to this power. And they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. You read about that in Daniel chapter 8, where it says that he would cast down the sanctuary to the ground, and he would take away the daily, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. Yes, Sister Talia, go ahead.
Again, where at least I'm at a different point with understanding, particularly from 27 down, and for the ships. Well, I mean, the Bible speaks in consistency from my understanding. So if it talks about one particular entity, it continues to speak about that entity to clarify exactly as you've been stating. However, I don't see that it would be the papacy, simply for me, because of the fact that there was the Battle of the Nile that took place. There was, and most, as I believe you had said once before, and I'm not sure, and I could be wrong, that it can't be France, but France did play a role in this whole scheme of things. So when Rome turned to the papal system, it was just for a certain point in time, and France was, as I understand it, was the one who went to war against Egypt at that time, and Egypt had an alliance with Europe or somewhere, whereas
Sister
that's
Talia,
when that. Okay.
What verse are you pointing to? We need to know the verses so we can follow what you're saying.
11, oh, I'm sorry, maybe 1144 is where
Yeah,
we
but
come
we are
to.
not yet at 44.
I know, I'm just moving so ahead. Sorry. Oh, my apologies.
Yes,
Okay.
if you are disagreeing with me on these verses that we are looking at, then that's what I'm interested in. But we are not yet, we haven't yet come to 44.
I am in a way, but I gotta go back and read it well with
Right.
you in my book.
Okay, if you have a disagreement, I want to know just what it is that you disagree with. All
Oh,
right,
I will, but continue.
sure. So it says, and such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. But the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. So what we have is that we are looking at the persecutions of the Dark Ages, where true Christianity was corrupted. All right, give me a second. I have to go and try to see if I can mute everybody because 3 verse 16 is having a shower and everyone can hear. All right, okay, mute all. All right, Sister Elizabeth, I've muted everybody. So from verse 32 coming down, we have, I believe, pretty much a description of the persecutions of the Dark Ages. I don't think we need too much commentary. It says, those who do wickedly against the covenant will be corrupted by flatteries. That is one of the methods used by the papacy. But the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. We can think of the reformers here, and many of them, and they that understand among the people shall instruct many. Yet they shall fall by sword and by flame and by captivity and by spoil many days. Actually, it was over 1,000 years that this persecution continued. Now when they shall fall, they shall be helped with a little help. But many shall cleave to them with flatteries. And some of them of understanding shall fall to try them and to purge them and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. So what we see at this point is that we look at the papal persecutions and we look at this king who would have indignation against the Holy Covenant and would pollute the sanctuary of strength and would take away the daily sacrifice and all the rest of it. And I think most of us, the best interpretation we have of this is that it represents the papacy. There's no other power that I can think of during those years that would meet this description except the papacy, especially when it says that he would pollute the sanctuary of strength and take away the daily sacrifice. So, you come down to verse 36, and this is where I'm going to take care to read through this passage. I know that we have a certain interpretation of this. I'm going to look at it, and I'm going to take each point step by step, because here is where I think we have to read with discretion, with discrimination. Now it says, and the king shall do according to his will.
Before you continue, brother, I need to ask you, you just finished the last verse 35. So at the appointed time, was that appointed time 1798 when the papacy in 1260 lost its reign or power? I just want to be sure.
Yes, I think so. There are several places where it talks about an appointed time in Daniel 11. I think about 3 different places. So most of them point to this time where the king or the papacy actually continues to do these things until a time appointed. Now in verse 36 it says, and the king shall do according to his will. and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. Now, what I've learned, what people have taught, is that this power is also the papacy. Now, I think Sister Talia is going to say that this represents the French Revolution, that it represents the French Revolution. But I'm going to look at the details of this, and I'm going to tell you why I am not sure that either of those interpretations is going to hold up. I see your hand, Sister Talia. Let me read through the passage, then I'll allow you to speak. Let me read through this description. It says, and the king shall do according to his will. Now, which king? You will say naturally it refers to the king of the north, and I agree with you. But remember, as we have been reading through Daniel 11, the identity of the king of the north keeps changing. It keeps changing because at one point it has to do with the Greek king, and then it changes to the Roman king, and it changes to the king Julius Caesar, then it changes to Augustus, and it keeps changing until it changes to the papacy. And here we see now it says, and the king shall do according to his will. And what I am asking you to consider, is it the same identity or is it somebody else? Now, here's what it says about this king that I want us to pay attention to. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god. Some will say that this applies to the papacy. He did do this. It says he shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods. They will say that the papacy didn't really do this, although he tried to elevate himself to the place of God. He shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. When was the accomplishing of the indignation? For that is determined shall be done. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. Verse 38. But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver, and with precious stones and pleasant things. Now, there are those who say that this refers to the papacy, and I know that some Adventist pioneers, some Adventists, say that this refers to the French Revolution, and that this description of this person is referring to the nation of France. I have reasons why I don't agree with that interpretation, and I'm going to explain why in a moment. But anyway, I know that Sister Talia had her hand up, and I see Aaron has his hand up, so let me take those comments before I go on.
Thank you, brother. So my reasoning behind it not being the papal power, because it had came to that appointed time, 1798, and it couldn't have here, and I'm looking at verse 36, where it says
It will be for a time appointed.
yes. And so moving forward to verse 37, it says, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor a desire of woman. The papacy continued to regard the desires of their fathers. They kept with their continual religious practices. So it couldn't have been the papacy, because they continued and kept kept regarding their fathers' desires, and they themselves, because of the French Revolution, they disregarded the idea of any gods. They became atheistic, and they didn't what is it? They didn't have the desire of women with marriage, and they were just a hot mess,
But
and
you,
that's the
so
wrong
your
choice.
understanding is that this king of the north at this point is a nation of France.
Correct.
All right.
Because, and he said, and let me finish with this point, that historically, if you go back in history to look, and I will pull that up. I'll do it in a few minutes. That he himself, Napoleon, when he was asked historically, who is on your side, what God is on your side, he literally said the God of forces, meaning that whoever their God was, Apollos, because he was atheistic or whatever the case may have been.
All right.
So I
We'll
don't
come.
consider it the papacy. That's why.
Yeah, neither. We'll come to that, Sister Talia. All right, we'll come back to that point. Brother Ian, go ahead.
As you read through it, what came to my mind was the eighth king of the eighth head, or the eighth king rather, eighth of the beast of Revelation 17. That's what comes to my mind.
All right.
Because this seemed to be coming towards the end.
Yes. All right. So some people say that this represents a papacy, and some people, and Sister Talia is in agreement with this, some people believe that it refers to France and the French Revolution. Now, I will show you something. I'm going to add a few little elements here that will I hope will make people think a little bit more about this, because there are some reasons why I'm thinking that I don't agree with either of those positions. And I will show you. First of all, let me go to a passage here and ask us to consider this passage. I want you to look at this passage, and it says, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped." It says here of this king that he will magnify himself above every God. He as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Now, of course, the understanding is that this is the papacy, but if you look at it, a lot of this is very similar to what it says here in Daniel 11 and verse 36. Now, here is the thing about this chapter. I'm going to skip down to near the end of this chapter and look at what it says. It says that at the time of the end, the king of the south will push at this king of the north. Now, if the king of the north is a papacy, what it means is that somebody will interfere with the papacy. If the king of the north is France, it means that somebody will interfere with France. And who will interfere with France will be the king of the south, which, according to the theory that Sister Talia proposes, would be Turkey. Somehow Turkey became the king of the south. And the teaching is that at the time of the end, which they set at 1798, Turkey would interfere with France, and the king of the north, France, would come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, horsemen, ships, enter into the countries and overflow and pass through. France would also enter into the glorious land that is Israel. Many countries will be overthrown, but these will escape out of his hand. France would stretch out his hand upon the countries, and the land of Egypt will not escape. He would have power over the treasures of gold, of silver, and so on. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him, France. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy, and utterly to make away many, that is France. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, that is in Israel, yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him, that is France. If you say that France is the king of the north, then all of these things should be true of France. And none of these things is true of France. France never planted the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, and then came to his end with nobody to help him. It didn't happen. And furthermore, I'll show you at the beginning of the next chapter, which is chapter 12. Look at what it says. And at that time shall Michael stand up. Meaning when? When France is destroyed with nobody to help it, then Michael stands up. If France is the king of the north. Now what Aeon says, and that's your hand, Sister Talia, what Aeon said is really more in keeping with what I believe. Because when you look at the description of the king of the north here in Daniel chapter 11, He will exalt himself, magnify himself above every god. This is more in keeping with what it talks about the beast when he arises from the bottomless pit in Revelation chapter 17. When the beast comes out of the bottomless pit and destroys Babylon, the beast that comes from the bottomless pit is a power that respects no religion. It destroys Babylon and it tries to destroy true religion. It is said to come from the bottomless pit. So this description is more in keeping with the king of the north, in my opinion. But certainly there are several things here. You could say that you could identify France because you could say it happens in 1798. That's what happened with France. But if you go down further and you read all that it says about the king of the north and him coming to his end and planting his palace in the Holy Land, there's a lot there that could not fit France. So go ahead, Sister Talia.
Um, I didn't mean to imply that France had what oh gosh, how can I put it? Turkey was the king of the north at that time,
The
or
south.
that province. I get that.
The south.
And so when France came against Egypt, who had an alliance with the I believe Turkey, or I'm not quite sure right now. I'm a little bit convoluted, or with the British or European nation at that time. They're the ones that came from the north, and that's what um they're the ones that came from the north to fight the war, or from the regions of Russia, or whatever the case may be, to fight against France, whereas France had lost that war, that battle.
Okay, I'm confused.
Me too, in a little bit, in a way. And I know the history. I just have to pull out the book to read it, because I went from one historical um um historical document to another. I went through at least three of them, to make sure that they corroborated, so that it applies to exactly what it says here. And with the battle, the papacy never had a battle. The papacy didn't have an army.
All right. Sister Talia, until you are sure and
Okay,
you're
you're
able
right.
to share it with us,
You're right.
let's to leave it.
Thank
Let's
you.
do that. Because it only creates confusion. Because as we
Sorry.
look at the verses and we go through the verses, there are elements that don't fit France. And I agree that there are elements that don't fit the papacy either. So I have questions about both those interpretations. But anyway, what I will do, we have come to the point where we have to stop because the time is up. But what I would like to do next week, and maybe Sister Talia, if you have a systematic, cohesive explanation,
Thank you. I will.
You can go back and look at it, and next
God
week we'll
willing.
hear what you say.
Yes, God
All
willing.
right.
Yes.
Okay. So let me say quickly that the identity of the King of the North is a conundrum that everybody has been looking at, including myself, and I'm still trying to find a way to harmonize all that it says with one power. There's no one power that I can see that everything comes together perfectly. The closest thing, as Ayan said, it looks more in keeping, and the timing also fits with the eighth king of Revelation 17, the beast from the bottomless pit. Is the last power on this earth. The beast from the bottomless pit is the last dominant power on this planet. And so it stands to reason that this is the same king of the north that we see here as the last power in Daniel 11. So it stands to reason. That is the connection. And we can look at this. So some people say, they have said that the king of the north is Europe and the king of the south is Islam. That's what some people are looking at. There are other people who say the king of the north is the papacy and the king of the south is communism. And some people are looking at that. There are some people who are looking at the king of the north refers to the economic powers of the north and the west. As you know, as we have mentioned a few times, Even the secular powers in the world are referring to the BRICS nations. You know what BRICS, I'm sure everybody know what BRICS is. It's an economic bloc that is made up of Russia, China, Brazil, India, and a few other nations who have formed a rival economic bloc to rival what is called the G7 and the G20. And on the other hand, you have America and Europe and the first world countries. And these BRICS nations are forming a rival economic bloc. Now, what is interesting is that the press, the secular powers of the world are referring to the America-European alliance nations as the global north. And they are referring to the BRICS nations as the global south. So just independently of the Bible, secular people have chosen to align the world into two blocks that they call the north and the south. Now maybe it's just coincidence. Maybe it has nothing to do with the prophecy. I would want to see further developments before I try to make that connection, but it is very interesting, and especially because the global north includes the two powers that the Bible shows us will be doing the most damage at the end. Europe and the United States. Europe and the United States, both of those are the main powers in what is called the global north. So that is very interesting to me. So, where Daniel 11 is concerned, the king of the north and his final attack, I think we still have to wait a little bit to see exactly how things play out, because none of the explanations that I have seen will fit perfectly into the description that is there in Daniel. So, as far as I'm concerned, the different interpretations are interesting, but we have to wait before we come to final conclusions. That's my final word for this evening. Brother Ian, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with you. We have to wait until it is fulfilled. What is important, though, and is very interesting, is that so far we have history up to a certain point where the king of the north and south is concerned, where you have history collaborating with the prophecy, how the prophecy was written, like the fulfillment. And so it gives us the assurance that what is going to happen, we'll find it will fit into the prophecy somewhere along the line, and we just have to wait and observe and watch keenly. The other thing that you said that I just wanted to highlight is that they call the BRICS the southern bloc, but yet still the largest country in it is really more north than south, which is Russia. Right. So, it's not a geographical thing. It's just they just call it. I don't know how they come to align the names of it, because it's not really geographically. It's not predominantly south.
And that may give us a clue about how to identify these powers, because what we are looking at is an ideological distinction and not a geographic distinction. Precisely. And that happens in the prophecies sometimes.
Right. That's exactly my point.
Mm-hmm. So Brother David, there's still a force out there, and this is just my own opinion, with the Islamic nations. So is that an entity to just consider also with regards, because no one is even considering that option, and to this day I'm always looking towards what's going to happen in Jerusalem, because that's where all this is going to or Israel, where all this is going to culminate. Things are going to culminate. So whatever happens there, based on all other events happening all around that, it's going to all culminate in Jerusalem. And my point in saying that is that they were initially trying to have sacrifices done, but they gave up on taking down the temple, the mosque there. I forgot the two names for it, and it's just still there, and things just go in and out of what the plans are to bring about the return of Christ by Christians all over the world, supposed Christians. I don't know, and I'm just looking at that for me and considering it.
All right. there are certain things you're confident about and you're looking for it, and there are some things that there, everything depends upon the perspective we take, or a lot depends upon the perspective. Because when you say everything centers around Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is the marker, I know that a lot of people believe this, and I see good reasons why people think this way, but I also see reasons why I would be cautious. And the reason I would give is that when you come to the book of Revelation, for example, Jerusalem is not so much a physical place. And even in the book of Daniel, when it talks about the place of the sanctuary being cast down, it's not a place. I know Daniel 11, it focuses on literal things, physical things. But I heard somebody say something one time, and I am considering it too. They say that when you look at the prophecy, everything before the time of Christ is literal. But if we come to a time in the prophecy when you move past the time of Christ, you have to change your interpretation and you have to start looking at things in a symbolic way, because after the time of Christ, Jerusalem is no longer the place in the Middle East. It's a place where we worship above. And the Jews are no longer the people with genetic blood. The Jews are now the people of God. And I'll tell you one thing in Daniel 12 that supports that. In Daniel 12 it says, and at that time thy people shall be delivered. Who are thy people? If we say Jerusalem is literal and the Holy Land is literal, then the people ought to be literal. So we're talking about Jews. But if we say the Jews, thy people is not the Jews,
It's not.
it's okay, then why do we say Jerusalem is literal?
Because for me, and let me respond to that, that's where, well, I don't know what you believe, but I'm believing that Christ will come, that's where Christ will land. Will he not?
When?
When he returns, all eyes will see him, of course, but the central focus in those events will be.
So Sister Talia, if
Yes,
you are
sir.
in America, you won't see him, you have to go to Israel?
No, I said all eyes will see him all over the world. Everyone will see him. I understand that.
But
But
you said,
ultimately, when Christ, you know what? Let me get the backup information before I
I know
talk.
you're getting confused because you're talking about the third coming.
No, no, no. I'm not talking about the third coming. Um,
What reason do you have for saying that at his second coming, the focus will be Israel? Give me one reason.
you know what? I can't because I might just be talking about the third return.
I think so. I think so,
I think
Sister
so.
Talia.
Okay.
Yes.
Let me go drink some water and get it together. Okay.
Okay, all right, Sister Talia.
Yeah, hey, but I just need to know.
Yeah, nonetheless.
All right. So anyway, we're going to close off here for this evening, and we'll pick up again next week. When it comes to Daniel 11, it's always a rough study, but I'm glad we kind of almost finished. So next week, I promise we will be on grounds where we are more comfortable. All right.
Yes.
Thank you all for joining me this evening and for sharing in the study, such as it was. And we're going to pray and then dismiss and look forward to being together again next week. So let's pray.